Hello everyone, this is the Daily Joker 77. Alright, so welcome to your crash course in forensic science. Today class, yes, we continue into this morbid world with blood. And well, before we get into the main part of the course and lesson, we have to understand how blood behaves, blood stain analysis, and patterns, and so on and so forth. So, here's the introduction. Blood behaves according to certain scientific principles. Trained blood stain pattern analysis can examine the blood evidence behind and draw conclusions as to how the blood may have been shed. So, it's pretty much, they analyze in the crime scene, okay, let's say there was a pipe involved. So, we have to, as forensic scientists, we would have to basically, not saying I am one, just saying as an example, CSI, specifically they're trained in this field of crime scene investigation, or, as I said, basically have to see if it was a cast-off pattern. Let's say if it was a swipe, basically, did the pattern go this way from one force object? We'll get into that later. Analysis categorizes the stains by gathering information from spatter patterns, transfers, voids, and other marks. Oh boy, this is going to be a long video, just saying. Using principles of biology, behavior of blood, physics, cohesion, capillary action, and velocity. Let's see if I can try to explain that because I didn't note it, but I can try to explain it. Basically, let's say, like, with my example, how fast did the pipe hit the victim in the skull, for example, like how fast it hit the head, how fast did the blood travel as basically the head was hit. Let's say this way, how fast did it travel up the mouth. And mathematics, geometry, distance, angle. So, basically, where in the crime scene did it hit? How far did the blood travel? What angle did it travel? Hope I'm going to answer your message. Okay. Basically, this all coincides to assist. God, I cannot speak right today. Investigators in answering these questions: where did the blood come from? What caused the wounds? From what direction was the victim wounded? How were the victim or victims and perpetrator or perpetrators positioned? Okay. What movements were made after the bloodshed? How many potential perpetrators were there, or perpetrator? Like, how many were there? How many were present, I should say. Does the blood stain or evidence support or refute witness statements? So, God almighty. I'm getting interrupted. I don't like this. I'm not interrupted, but just, I don't like explaining shit that I've already explained. I'm in the flow here. Okay, where was I? Oh yeah. Okay, so I was explaining statements. Okay, so does it basically line up, or does it contradict or refute what the witness has said about the crime scene, about how the bodies were discovered? Like, was this a gunshot victim, on the sidewalk? Was there pool blood? Was the stain specifically there in a certain pattern? A lot goes into this. Alright, here we go. So, as you've learned a bit from bloodstained blood pattern analysis, let's go into principles of blood. This is where you need to understand basically the make of it, how does it behave? This is all going to be in part of the lesson. Blood contains both liquid, plasma, and serum. Basically, plasma is, if you've looked at, let's say, if you've gotten a paper cut and you see a little blood trickle out and you move it together with your thumb and your index finger, you'll see this white-looking substance. That's the plasma. It's the thick part of the blood next to the white and red blood cells, which are the solids. And the platelets and the proteins are also solids. There's actually protein in the blood. The platelets are what carry your cells, what carries your genes and your DNA. And also, this is DNA. This is a part of DNA evidence. Before I go on, blood is in a liquid state within the body, and upon exit, it retains those properties until blood clots, basically, which are when the wound is starting to heal, the blood has stopped flowing and it's clotting. So basically, what blood clotting is when basically the blood starts to solidify and close up the wound. It basically what leaves a scab, what leaves all the parts of the healing process from a major cut or a major laceration or wound. So basically, blood clots within a few minutes, forming a shiny, dark, gel-like substance that grows more solid as time progresses. Basically, if the CSI and police don't get there on time to the scene, they'll lose all the precious evidence of the blood pool if it was a major homicide. And basically, it'll solidify, and they won't be able to get enough DNA evidence out of it, because once the blood starts to bleed and pool more, it's very time precious. The presence of blood clots in bloodstains, this is important, can indicate that an attack was prolonged. Basically, as it states, if I can try to explain this if I have to, basically the attack being prolonged means basically the time window the attack happened, or that the victim was bleeding for some time after the injury occurred. Basically, the blood pooling. And here's another thing about when the time of death occurs. The time of death can also be indicated by how the blood pooled. Blood pooling is when gravity acts on where the body finally lays in position, or how it was positioned. The blood will pool wherever gravity is pulling it towards. Let's say if they're on their stomach, it'll pool in the chest cavity, basically the upper torso. So that's where it'll pull it further on the back. It'll pull all the way in their back, because it gravitates. Gravity pulls it. Blood can leave body in many different ways. It can flow, it can drip, it can spray, spurt, gush, or ooze from wounds. Yes, a lot of notes. Trust me, this was a lot to write down. Types of bloodstains. Transfer. Basically, this results from objects coming into contact with existing bloodstains, leaving wipes, swipes, or pattern transfers. So, wipes are basically the way the blood travels. This is within the arc it travels, and the swipes are, the wipes are basically the blood smeared and going in what direction. The swipes are the spray or the gush going in what direction, what pattern. And the pattern transfers, which a pattern transfer is where the object, or let's say a shoe, for example, stepping in the pool of blood. This would be a pattern transfer, so it's transferring the blood to another point in the crime scene. Passive. Drops, flows, and pools typically result from gravity acting on an injured body. This is a passive blood stain. So basically, you get drops, you get flows, you get pools of blood, and I just explained that. So just going a little more deep. Impact or projected bloodstains. This is resulting from blood projecting through the air and are usually seen as spatter, but it may also include gushes, splashes, and arterial spurts. Tongue twisting here. So gushes meaning, let's say the jugular vein was sliced wide open, it would just gush everywhere. Splashes, let's say, what's a good example? Oh, here's a good example. Let's say an attacker had a machete and literally just sliced the victim open. just splashes all this blood everywhere. Ugh. Man, this is making me feel a little stomach sick. Arterial spurts. As case in point, a jugular vein is an artery. There's arteries here in the jugular vein that it's categorized into. So spurts are like, just going like a fountain. So it's just spurting everywhere. It's just coming everywhere from the vein. Okay, here we go. Blood spatter. It's categorized as impact spatter, created when, impact spatter, created when force is applied to a liquid blood source, let's say the head. That's a big example. There's all this blood that's contained around your skull, and it's basically what protects the brain and everything. I'm not sure if I can handle talking about this. This gets a little, this is a little intense to talk about here. Or projection spatter, caused by arterial spurts, expirated spray, or spatter cast off an object. Okay, here's the kinds of spatter. Gunshot spatter includes. So gunshot spatter is when, case in point, when a victim is shot, here's what will happen. It will become both forward spatter from the exit wound and back spatter from the entrance. So the forward spatter is a mist. It's coming out. It's misting because the bullet is hitting the body so quickly that the blood just mists everywhere. Just this little mist going everywhere. The exit wound is where that big portion of the blood comes out. It will vary depending on the caliber of the gun. Let's say 9mm. That's a very small bullet. I actually have a shell for an example. So this is literally the shell of a 9mm. So this is literally how large the bullet is, not very large. So you'd see a few drops coming from that exit wound, and where the victim was struck. If the victim was struck from a headshot, trust me. I just ate before I did this. Oh my god, my stomach. Okay. Where the bullet exits the body. Okay, breathe, just breathe. I know as I talk more about forensics, it's harder to stomach. I took this years in a row and I want to study this for a side career. I should be pretty iron stomach here, and I am, and I'm trying my best. So where the bullet exits the body. Okay, I'm going to talk about, not a headshot, but I'm going to talk about torso. So let's say it's a through and through. So let's say if the victim was shot from point A to point B. The bullet would strike through the body and impact the wall. I'll cover that in another episode. That'll be ballistics. That's another story for another time here. Okay. So with through and through, you're going to see a mist. Then you're going to see the gush of blood, the splash of blood, depending. Let's say if it's a rifle round, that's a larger caliber bullet. That's a larger caliber, so it's going to create more of a larger exit wound. The entrance wound is pretty small. The exit wound is like, typically in action movies. You'll see this huge exit wound on the victim, and blood will just go everywhere. That's an exit wound. And the distance between the victim and the gun and location of the victim relative to the wall, floors, and objects. Man, this is a lot to talk about. Long lesson here, so pay attention. Typically, forward spatter is a fine mist. Back spatter is larger and fewer drops. Case in point. Here we go. Cast off. Results when an object is swung in an arc. So, let's say a baseball bat. I got one. Baseball bat is a pretty large weapon to create quite an arc. So, an arc would be, it could be sideways. It could be downward. So let's say a downward arc. Boom! Just smacks the head of the victim, right? So the cast off is where it's flinging blood or to nearby surfaces. So it's flinging blood to nearby surfaces, onto nearby surfaces, and towards it. Because the bat is a large surface, this is going to create more of a collection of blood on the surface of the weapon or the murder weapon. So, This occurs when an assailant swings the blood-stained object back before inflicting another blow. That's how the blood goes everywhere, because it is just repeated and repeated. This is typically seen in crimes of passion or overkill, as it's typically called. Alrighty. So cast off. Okay. Here we go. Okay, just making sure. Alright, arterial spray. This refers to the spurt of blood when a major artery is severed. I made a huge example with the jugular vein, because that's the biggest artery besides the femoral in your thighs. That could be the largest to sever, and the most typical way the body bleeds out is from rarely, if this is nicked, you're not going to survive. You got a very little chance of surviving, because the EMTs, if the victim is still alive from the attack, they have to act very quickly, because that is a huge artery. Once that's severed, you're fucked, or nicked, you're done. You're just fucked. It's not a good situation. Blood is propelled out of the breached blood vessel by pumping of the heart. So, okay, I'm going to show an example here. So when you walk, if you're wounded, and let's say it's to your arm, let's say an artery or a blood vessel is wounded on your arm. As you walk, it's going to drip into a pattern of drops. When you're walking slowly, it's going to be a very consistently spaced out pattern of blood drops. If you're walking very fast or you're running, it's going to be wider, consistent. It's not going to be a consistent pattern. It's going to be a wider spaced pattern of blood drops, and they're going to be larger. They're not going to be smaller. They're going to be larger because more blood is being pumped out from the heart. Oh boy, oh boy. Okay, expirated spatter. Usually caused by blood from an internal injury mixing with air from the lungs being expelled through the nose, mouth, or an injury to the airways or lungs. So this would be, well, let's say a victim is struck to the chest, to the stomach, to the back, to the sides. You know, the ribs are caved in. It's starting to create an internal hemorrhage. It's starting to expel through the airways, through the throat, the nose, or the mouth. It's starting to expel. That's a very big example. And this is characteristic of this kind of spatter. Small air bubbles are in the drops of blood in this type of spatter. So you're going to see, like I just said, you're going to see small air bubbles within the drops of this type of spatter. Okay, bloodstains are sometimes latent or seen by the naked eye. So, let's see. Oh, and here's a fact. If blood is in a fabric, it's not going to leave that fabric. Because of how it behaves, how its characteristics are, it will never leave that fabric washed out or not. It's still going to be residual bloodstain. So, let's say you got a cut into the sleeve of your shirt, or dropped onto your shirt. It is never going to leave that fabric. It is permanently in there unless you cut away that part of the fabric and sew on a new portion. It's going to stay within that fabric, especially if, okay, let's say it's a wood floor and there's spacings. The blood, as much as it can be cleaned, and there's no such thing as perfect crime, always the perpetrator or the criminal will always be caught. There's no such thing as perfect crime, okay? So let's say there's a wood floor and the criminal tried his or her hardest to clean the blood. It's in the cracks. And luminol, this is a kind of chemical I can't remember what it's made of to my best memory. But basically what it does, it creates a blue luminescent glow reacting with the iron in the blood's hemoglobin. So it glows blue under UV light or black light. There's two kind of lights you can use to illuminate the luminol. And as I just said, UV lights can show the reaction. UV lights are more commonly used besides black lights. Alright. Yep, that's part of the lesson. Okay. Here we go. Last leg of the journey. Whew. Almost 30-minute video. Very long. Bloodshed events. Sharp force injuries, commonly stabbing. These are caused by knife or ice pick. These are just examples. More knife is the sharp force injuries. This, obviously, you'll see a knife wound, and less blood is deposited on the instrument, resulting in small or linear patterns of stains. This is very easy to find the tool mark on a victim from a knife because it's very characterized by a slash or a stab wound. Very easy to determine, very easy to basically determine what kind of weapon was used. Now this is where it gets a little trickier. Blunt force trauma, beating or hitting. You don't always need a weapon, mind you, to create blunt force trauma. It can be from kicks, it can be from knees, it can be from elbows, it can be from fists. Fists are more commonly, seen in a like, let's say there was a domestic dispute between two male perpetrators, and the victim was beaten mercilessly just by fists alone. That's blunt force trauma. That's a little trickier to find out because it depends on the severity of the injuries and the bruising and whatnot. So that can be a little trickier to find, but more it's commonly characterized by objects that are large, such as bats or hammers. Hammers leave a specific pattern on their tool mark, or the sharper end, the part that you pull out a nail. That leaves a very specific tool mark. Very hard to determine if it was the end that was used to create the blunt force trauma. So, if it impacts the liquid blood source, the face, or the skull, the area, the large surface area will collect more blood, producing drops of various sizes. So, case in point. So, let's say somebody was just beaten mercilessly by a bat, just swinging and swinging and swinging repeated hits. This is going to create spatter and drops everywhere. It's just going to be everywhere. It's going to be a messy cleanup. Messy crime scene to clean up for the cleaners. I feel bad for them in those kinds. So drops are characterized by how they're constructed. First of all, you have, obviously, the round portion of it. Sometimes they're not very round. Sometimes they're very odd shapes. So more in a blood drop, you're going to see the spines. This is the outer edges of the blood drop. This is what forms it. The satellites. The satellites are little tiny little droplets around the drop. And then you have your tails. You have your tails of the spines. So if it's an elongated part of an elongated blood drop will have a tail. Alright, void patterns. Very last part. Okay. Void patterns, this is where, let's say a victim was standing thusly like this, and they were killed, and there's all this spatter around the wall in the shape of a person. This is very easy to find how the victim was killed. What kind of object created this blood spatter, this splash that formed around the shape on the wall, or thusly, if it was in case, it would form along the wall, and thusly here, in the shape of the person or object that blocked the path of the blood. Okay, I gotta take a drink of water. That was a lot of talking. Alright, so that is my crash course lesson on blood and bloodstain pattern analysis. I hope you learned something. I hope, as I continue to educate to my best ability, I cannot wait to study forensics in the future, and my goal is to become a CSI, so I'm getting it reviewed as I teach. I'm basically teaching my crash course here. This is a lot of fun to do. I should teach forensics. You know what? I should teach it. I'd be good. Probably good at this. So, I hope you learned something, like I said. Yeah, continue to watch my first episode because that'll really educate you on basics of trace evidence. Really basic lesson on it. This is more depth of blood because blood is a lot, as you've seen. It's a very interesting type of trace evidence. It's a very interesting type of evidence, and a lot goes into it. And you can watch Dexter. Very, very good example of bloodstain pattern analysis or spatter analysts. That's what Dexter is. He's a spatter analyst. So, this has been the Daily Joker 77, your teacher for today, or tonight. And class is dismissed.